Wouldn't it be awesome if your phone instantly told you when the flight prices drop below your budget? Well, this is exactly what we're building today, a Telegram bot which sends you messages as soon as the flight prices drop below your budget. And yes, we will be using Python, SQLite and Telegram, and they're all completely free. In part 1 we built a flight scraper using SerpAPI and Python. If you haven't seen that yet, please check the video. Today we're going to take this project to the next level by introducing price tracking and Telegram notifications. Stay tuned. To start with, we need to create a new project in PyCharm. So you need to go to PyCharm and create a project with the name of your choice. So I've created a project named Flight Price Notifier, and we're going to create 3 different files. So one of them is going to be app.py, db.py and keys.py. So let's start with reviewing db.py because I think this is probably one of the most important modules in this project. And this module is responsible for defining the classes which we're going to use to store data in the SQL database, or let's say SQLite database, not SQL. And yeah, so in here we define 2 different classes. One of them is to store the information about the users, or let's say our customers who are going to interact with the Telegram bot. So this class contains only 2 different fields. So one of them is the ID, and then the other one is chat ID. So we're going to identify which chat we need to send a message to by this chat ID, which will come from Telegram. And then the second class which we're going to create is called tracked flight. So this is the information that our users / customers are going to send to the Telegram bot, and we're going to parse this information and basically create an object of type tracked flight and save that into our SQLite database. So this class contains a bunch of different fields. So we've got ID, then we have user ID, which maps to the ID of the user. Then we have the origin of the flight, the destination, the outbound date. Then we have the return date, the price threshold, and then we have a Boolean flag, which basically tells us if we have sent a notification to this customer. So basically, whenever the price reaches the threshold for their flight of interest, then we send a notification and then we mark this as true so that we don't keep sending the same notification over and over again. And finally, at the bottom of this file, we're creating our SQLite database, which is going to store the information in a file called flights.db. So you can see that this file has already been created because I run the program already. So by default, when you run the program, it creates this file for you. So the next step is to go to Telegram and create a new chatbot. So in order to do that, you need to find botfather from the search bar, and then basically you need to start a chat with botfather. And after this, you need to type /new bot, and then it's going to ask you a few questions. So the first one is the name of the actual chatbot, then it's the username. Once you have provided the name and the username of your new chatbot, then Telegram is going to create that for you, and it's going to give you this access token, which you can basically save somewhere because we're going to need this in our Python script. So this token gives us access to the bot, and we can use this token to send messages and read messages so that we can basically create all the interactions between the bot and our users. Once you have generated the access token for the Telegram bot, the next step is to create another file in our Python project, which is going to be called app.py. And in here you can see what we're doing. So basically we're importing a bunch of libraries. So we import time, date, time, requests, threading, and then we import Flask, request, And yeah, so in here we have created another file which is called keys.py, and this file contains the Telegram bot token, and it also contains the SerpAPI key. So for the SerpAPI key, you can watch part 1 where you can see how you can generate this. And then from the DB file we import user, tracked flight, and then the session. So after this we define this Telegram API URL, and then this is how the URL looks, and then you pass the Telegram bot token and then / send message. So as the name suggests, this API is used for sending messages. And then we have this webhook URL, and this is the webhook which is going to receive messages from Telegram. So basically when someone sends a message to your Telegram bot, then this is the URL or the webhook which is going to receive all the messages. So we're going to use ngrok for this purpose so that it generates a URL for us, because we can't test it by running this locally. So we need to expose our local host to the outside world, and I will show you how to do that in ngrok later on. So after this, what we do is we basically create a new Flask application. So after this we have a bunch of functions. So the first one is checker thread. So we're going to come back to this in a few minutes. If we look at the main function of this module, you can see that we're actually starting a thread before we run the Flask application. So you need two different processes. One of them will be responsible for processing messages from the Telegram webhook, which we already defined. And the other process is responsible for iterating over the collection of tracked flights in the database, and then comparing the flights from the SerpAPI against the price threshold for a given flight. And then if there is a drop below the price threshold, then we basically need to send a notification to our customers. So this is how we set a webhook for our Telegram chatbot. So I've defined a function called setWebhook, and then you basically need to pass your Telegram bot token in this URL, and then at the end of the URL you need to add / setWebhook. And after this you basically need to put the webhook URL and then / webhook. So webhook URL will be the URL that will be generated by ngrok, and I'm going to show you what command you need to run so that you can get this URL and how to set it. And once this is done, basically when someone sends a message to your Telegram bot, then this webhook is going to receive that message. And basically we've defined this webhook endpoint, which is going to basically get the data. So what happens in here is when someone sends a message to our chatbot, we get this JSON response. And yeah, so in here what we're checking is basically if this JSON object has a message, then we want to process this message and see what exactly the customer wants. So we get the chat ID from this message, and then we also get the content of the message. So after this we perform two different checks. So if the content of the message starts with / start, it means that we just got a new user or a new customer who just started a conversation with the chatbot. And in this case, what we want to do is we want to send a welcome message. So you can see in here we're sending a message to this chat ID, and then this is the message, which is welcome, and then we explain how to use the track function. And in here basically what the users need to do is they need to type / track, then the origin, the destination, the date, and the price for the flight that they're interested in. And after this, we're saving this user in our database. And yeah, so let's look at the send message function, and then we're going to look at the save user. So if we go to the send message function, it's a very simple function. So it takes the chat ID and the text that we want to send. And in here again, we're using this send message URL, and we're performing a post request, and we're passing like a JSON body, and then in the JSON body we send the chat ID. So this is basically the user to which we want to send the message. And then we've got the actual content of the message. Just under this function, we've got the save user function, which takes a chat ID. And in here, what we're doing is we're creating a local session. And then what we do is we check if we have this user already. So this is like a select command in SQL, if you want to think about SQL. And then we're saying, okay, select all the users where the chat ID is equal to chat ID. And then if we don't have such a user, then we create a new user and then we add it to the database. If the user already exists for this chat ID, then we don't do anything. So we have covered the start command for our Telegram chatbot. And after this, if someone has typed /track, then they're interested in tracking the flight price. So what we're doing here is we're splitting the message and we're checking if the message consists of 5 different parts. If there's less than 5 parts, then we basically send the message back to the user to say that this is how the track command should be used. Otherwise, if we have 5 different parts, then we basically extract each individual part from the message. And you can see we've got origin, destination, date, and price. And what we do in here is first we're saving the flight. So if we look at save flight, it takes chat ID, origin, destination, date, and price. And again, in here we're creating a local session for the database. And after this, we're checking if we have a user in the database as per this chat ID. If we don't have this user, then first we basically create a user in our database. And after this, we create a tracked flight object, which has all the fields that basically are going to help us to ensure that the tracking works as expected. So I've got origin, destination, outbound date, price, threshold, and this boolean is set to false by default because at this point we haven't sent any price notification to this user, so it's important to set this to false. And after this, we're just basically adding this to our database. So once we have saved the flight details, after this we send a message to our user to say that we're tracking this flight. So what we're going to look at next is this thread, which starts before our Flask application runs. And this thread runs this checker thread function. So this is where all the magic happens for checking the database and then querying the SerpAPI. And if the price has dropped below a given threshold, then we send a notification to our users. So in here, what we're saying is basically we're checking for price updates. We create a session to our database. We get all the tracked flight objects from our database for which we haven't sent a notification yet. And for each flight, what we do in here is basically we deconstruct the object. So we extract the details that we're interested in, such as the origin of the flight, destination, outbound date, and we use this information to create a dictionary, which is used for getting information from the SerpAPI. So what we do with this dictionary is basically we're passing it into this GET request to the SerpAPI, and we get information about the flights. And once we have some flight data, we get the best flights from this list. And what happens next is basically, if we have any flight data or if we have best flights, we take the first one from the list, which usually has the cheapest price, and we extract the price from this object. And after this, we check if this flight price is less than or equal to the price threshold that one of our users has basically specified. And then if this is the case, what we do is we extract this user from the database. So the reason why we basically query the database and select the user in this case is because we don't have the chat ID stored under the tracked flight, but we have the user ID. So we use this user ID from the tracked flight to pull the user. And then once we have the user, then we can basically extract the chat ID so that we know which user we need to send the message to, and the correct chat ID to which the message needs to be sent. So in here, what we're doing is basically we're constructing our message. So we're passing the chat ID first, and then we basically build our message, and then we say, okay, your tracked flight from origin to destination on this date is now, I don't know, $400. And yeah, so the user is going to receive this message on Telegram. After this, we just want to mark this flight and make sure that we have tweaked this has sent notification boolean flag, and we've set that to true, just to make sure that on the next run of this thread or this for loop, we don't send the same notification to the same customer for the same flight, just so we can avoid spamming. Before we run this application and spin up our webhook, which is responsible for processing messages from our users and sending notifications, what we need to do is we basically need to expose our local host to the outside world. And in order to do this, we're using ngrok. You can use ngrok to test this application, and it's completely free to do that. You don't need to pay anything. So what you need to do is you need to go to ngrok.com, you need to sign up, and after this you basically need to follow the instructions depending on what kind of basically machine you have. If you have a MacBook, if you have a Windows machine or Linux machine, then the instructions will be different. In my case, I've got a MacBook, so I have followed the instructions in here as per this. So once you have installed ngrok on your machine, what you need to do is you need to generate a unique URL from ngrok. And in order to do this, you need to type ngrok http, and then you need to specify the URL of your local host. So in most cases, the local host on your machine will have this shape and form. But in case you have defined some different ports or some different names as part of the app.run function, then you need to tweak those to match the port and the URL. So once we hit enter in the terminal, you can see that now it's going to connect to ngrok, and it's going to give us a unique URL which you can use. And you can see that now this URL is actually forwarding the traffic to our local host. So what we need to do is we need to copy this URL, and we need to basically put it in here. So this will be our webhook URL. So this will be, let's say, the root of our webhook URL. And what is going to happen next is when we run this Flask application, this function is going to be called, which is set webhook. And what this is going to do is it's going to send this post request to Telegram, and it's going to say, hey, I want to set a webhook, and the URL of this webhook is the webhook URL which we just generated, and then /webhook. So I hope this makes sense, because once we've done this, then whoever is talking to our Telegram chatbot, their messages are going to be sent to our local host on this webhook. So once we have created our ngrok URL, the next step is to run our app.py. As you can see, our webhook was successfully set in Telegram and we got a notification to confirm this. And now you can see that every 5 seconds or so we're checking our database to see if there's any price updates. So at the moment there's no objects in the database, so it's just printing this message and it's not querying any APIs yet. So what we're going to do next is we're going to our browser, and I just wanted to see some flights from London to Bangkok and say I want to fly on 6th of September, and you can see all the different prices. So let's just switch that to US dollars just to make things slightly easier. So you can see the flight prices in US dollars. And now say if we want to really test this application quickly, what we can do is we can go to our Telegram bot and we can set a price notification, and we can say, okay, our budget is, for example, 350 US dollars. And what this should do is it should send us a Telegram notification to say that our desired flight is now $342. So let's go ahead and do this. So the next step is to go to Telegram and just send a message to our chatbot about the flight that we're interested in. And you can see here I've typed in /track London Heathrow to Bangkok, 6th of September, and then my desired price is $350. So basically I should get a notification for a flight if the price drops below 350, and we know already that there is a single flight on that day that's under 350. So once I send this message, then the system should basically insert the object in our database, and then our thread is going to run 5 seconds later. It's going to read this object about the tracked flight that we're interested in, and then it should query the SerpAPI, get the information about the best flights, and it should compare this price against the price from the SerpAPI. And yeah, so 342 is less than 350, so we should basically get a notification. So you can see that as soon as I typed in that I'm interested in this flight, I got a notification back saying that okay, now we're tracking this flight from London Heathrow to Bangkok on 6th of September, and then the threshold is 350 US dollars. And 5 seconds later I got a notification saying okay, your tracked flight from London Heathrow on 6th of September is now $342. And this matches exactly the information that we have on Google Flights. And just like that, you have your own price alert bot. With this setup, you will never overpay for flights. If you found this video useful, please like it and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what kind of videos do you want to see in the near future. Thank you very much for your time, and see you in the next video.